All right, for section 4.3, I'll take a look at 3 problems to help you out today. I'm going to take a look at finding, well, they're going to give you one trigonometric function, and they're going to ask you to find the other 5 trig functions of that angle. Another problem, they're going to give you 2 trigonometric functions, and then ask you to find basically the other trig functions. They ask for specific ones, but you could find any of them if you wanted to. And then the last one I'll do is just a quick one with the calculator, finding a particular trig function with your calculator. One that's not necessarily on there. Alright, so the first example, you are trying to find the other 5 trigonometric functions if the secant of theta is equal to 6. Now they are telling you that it's in the first quadrant. That's nice of them. That helps you out. When you draw your picture, make sure that you draw your triangle to make it look like it's in the first quadrant. Remember, you're always using the reference angle, which is right here, and that angle is the theta that we're looking for. Alright, now I want to find 6 trig functions, so I'm just going to quick list them out. I need the cosine, I need the sine, I need the tangent. I always do the 3 original, the ones that we're most familiar with. And then I'm going to need the secant. I don't technically need to write this one out since they gave it to us. I need the cosecant, and I need the cotangent. Alright, well, when I make my triangle, anytime I'm given a trig function, if it's secant, cosecant, or cotangent, since I'm not as familiar with those, what I tend to do is I switch it into sine, cosine, and tangent. So I'm going to change this in my mind to the cosine of theta is equal to 1/6, doing its reciprocal. Now it helps me 2 ways. One, it gives me one of the answers I'm looking for. Obviously they gave me that. And then the other thing that does is, when you're thinking of your SOHCAHTOA, you tend to remember that this is adjacent over hypotenuse. So instead of trying to memorize that, wait a second, secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, which I don't think would be that difficult for you to do, it's easier just to work with the 3 originals and then go based on that. So since this is cosine, I know this is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. And then I'll run through my Pythagorean theorem, and it's a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Make sure that you get your a, b, and c in the right spot. This is going to give me 36 minus 1, so b squared is equal to 35. And then, of course, I'll take the square root and get the square root of 35. This does not simplify. It would break down into 7 and 5, so that actually is simplified. If it did simplify, you should simplify. And now once you have the triangle filled out, you can figure out whatever trig function you want. If you want the sine, well, it's just opposite over hypotenuse, so square root of 35 over 6. Or if you want the tangent, it's opposite over adjacent, so square root of 35 over 1. I've already got the secant, but it's just the reciprocal. The sine, cosecant, reciprocal, so take square root of 35 and 6 and flip them over, or rationalize, or take the reciprocal of them. You are going to need to rationalize that, so your final answer should be 6 square roots of 35 over 35. If you multiply both top and bottom by a square root of 35, make sure that you check that. If that can simplify that fraction, then you should simplify it further. It doesn't, so you don't have to. Cotangent, this is over 1. If I take the reciprocal of it, it would be 1 over the square root of 35, and again I have to rationalize. So it's going to be the square root of 35 over 35, and there are your 6 trig functions. So anytime you're asked to find any particular trig function, you should try probably drawing a right triangle. Alright, same thing for this particular problem. It gives me the cosecant being square root of 13 over 2, the secant being the square root of 13 over 3. Why do they give you 2? Well, the reason they're giving you 2 is kind of the same reason that they gave you 1 here and then they told you which quadrant it's in. If I think about this one and this one only, so ignore this for now, because it's cosecant, I would probably do the reciprocal thing, and I would probably say that the sine of theta is equal to, it would be 2 over the square root of 13, which I could rationalize. So I actually know one of my answers right now is 2 square roots of 13 over 13. Alright, that's not why I did it, so I could solve that. The reason I did that is if I drew the triangle, if the sine is positive, my triangle could be in either of these 2 quadrants. It could be the first or the second, because they both have a positive y value. Well, now come back and look at this. Because the reciprocal of secant is cosine, you take a positive number and take the reciprocal of it, it's still positive. That means you have a positive x, a positive y. It has to be this quadrant, so it's not that one. So by giving you 2 trig functions, it's kind of like doing this. It's kind of saying, okay, there's one trig function to draw the triangle, there's the quadrant, but instead of coming right out and telling you, they gave you a second trig function to help you figure out which one it was. All right, so now I'm going to find these. Well, like I said, anytime you're looking for a trig function, if you can draw a right triangle, that would be great. So using the information I was given, I flipped it over to get this, and now I'm going to use that to fill out my triangle. There's the angle I'm looking for. It's sine, so its opposite is 2. Hypotenuse is the square root of 13. And if I do a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I am eventually going to get a b value of 3. So 2 squared is 4, square root of 13 squared is 13. I get b squared is 9, or my b value is 3. Now it's plus or minus 3, yes, the negative 3 would be here, but we're not actually using that triangle. And now that I've got that, I can find whatever trig function I want. So it wants the cosine, which is of course adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 3 over the square root of 13. I would need to rationalize that to 3 square roots of 13 over 13. I have also could have gotten it by using this and just taking the reciprocal. Alright, the tangent, I could take the sine divided by the cosine if I wanted to, or I can just look at my triangle and say it's opposite over adjacent. So it's 2/3. So that's how I recommend that you do those 3. Alright, for this particular problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of a trick I did for 4.2. So kind of ignore everything I've done. Let's pretend that I'm doing the problem from 4.2. I don't know what theta is, and I actually don't need to know it. I'm going to do that thing where I'm going to say, well, let's pretend that theta is actually 30 degrees. And let's kind of notice what happens here. If theta is 30 degrees, I know the point is the square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. Now if I take 30 and I actually plug it in here, then I'm actually trying to find the secant of 90 minus 30, or 60. Not important what we're trying to find right now, it's just that the angle. Well, I know at 60 degrees, my point is 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. Now notice what's happened. This is my original. Here's what they're asking me to find. Look at the x value. Look at the x value here. Look at the y value. Look at the y value. Notice that these two have switched places. That's important to recognize. That means on the triangle that I'm dealing with here, on theta, that means my x and y values have switched places. I still have the square root of 13 sitting here, but the x value of 3 is now the y value. The y value of 2 is now the x value, and I can establish that because of this. Or, of course, you could remember there's a cofunction that the secant of 90 minus theta is equal to the cosecant. You can remember that, or you can draw triangles. There's a lot of different functions that you could try to memorize. Being able to draw that triangle is a very useful, handy thing. So hopefully that makes sense to you why I'm doing this. I'm pretending that theta is 30. I'm plugging 30 in and then evaluating and noticing that the x and y values switch places. So I switch places on these x and y values. Now that I've got that triangle, there's my theta. Now I can finally answer the question. I want the secant of this angle is accounted for right here. This is actually 90 minus theta. I want the secant of this triangle. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. The cosine is 2 over the square root of 13. I would flip that over and get the square root of 13 over 2. So it can be a little confusing, but this is a very nice one to look at. If you can't understand why am I doing this, please come in and ask for help. If that kind of makes sense, you can see that I'm doing that so I can figure out the x and y values switch places, so I can switch these two. That's wonderful. If you have trouble with that, let me know. The last one, like I said, is just a calculator problem, and it's meant to be quick. Probably could do this already the way it is. I'm trying to find the secant of 56 degrees, 8 minutes, 10 seconds, and just a quick review on how we enter that in. And then I don't have secant on my calculator, so make sure that you're careful. I don't use this button. I don't use the little cosine inverse button. Remember, that finds an angle. That doesn't find an actual value. What I want is 1 divided by the cosine of, and then that angle. And now I just have to type that in. So a little refresher. Remember, you go to second apps to find those little symbols. So 56 degrees, second apps, pick number 1. It's 8 minutes, second apps again, pick number 2 this time. And then 10 seconds, remember that's not in the apps, that's, you got to hit alpha, and then you got to hit your plus sign to get the little minute or seconds. So it's 10, alpha, plus sign, hit enter, and that'll be your answer. Another way, of course, of doing that is you could just figure out what the cosine of 56 degrees, number 1, 8 minutes and 10 seconds is. You could just figure out the cosine and then say it's 1 divided by, if you hit second and then the little minus sign that says answer, it's basically saying that number, so you don't have to retype it. 1 divided by the previous answer, and of course it gives you the same thing. So nice quick little problem. So if you're having trouble with your homework, please stop in and ask for help.